Hello.
Hello. Yeah, I would please ask you for all, when not speaking, just mute yourself in the beginning. We will have later time also for questions and going through this. Yeah, well, now let's kick off the session. Very great first, Frank, to have you here. Before we go into it and talk more about this amazing person and Twilio, I just wanted to quickly introduce DueDash and give you like a frame of reference, who we are and what's happening here. So what is DueDash? So what is the biggest challenge for most startups, so most founders? If you think about it yourself or what you've seen with other people, where are certain things that always come up and which are challenging for you? Want to make a guess? I will tell you. It is access to capital and investors, because actually less than 1% of startups ever raise any funding. And if you're in an emerging market, the issue becomes even harder and even more challenging. And that's why we from DueDash want to enable you to enable first to become investable and then raise funding. Because up to this day, many investors will meet you and they see something is amiss. In the same way you might be asking yourself, why I'm not able to reach an investor. So how do we do this? DueDash helps you become investable and receive funding through our community platform in 3 ways. The community is here for you to learn fundraising through free education and success stories. You're able to learn also from sessions like these, like we will have like these. You're able to make your business investor ready by getting expert feedback. You're looking for somebody on marketing, on somebody on business development. Maybe you need support on your pitch deck. You can find the right experts, get the feedback you need, also from our side, and then start implementing it. But also investors can notice you through global community and also events that you're going to hold. For example, we have a pitching session coming up very soon in the future. So this is a community platform that we have here. Beyond the community platform, we are also building our main product and investability platform to guide both founders and investors through the whole fundraising journey, which is going to come up very soon in the summer and autumn. Now, what can you do all with DueDash? On the community platform, you can, of course, come in, meet other people, and build a local ecosystem. What you can also do is find co-founders, team members, find the right people to start your business. Validate your ideas in the pitch corner, join local and global events such as these. You can also get feedback, as I mentioned, for example, from your pitch deck. We have a free investment readiness check. Now, so you can send these to us by pitch@duedash.network if you're interested. And we're happy to review it and give you feedback. And this all is free for you. If you're interested in getting further support, we can also go into a further engagement and discuss with you, like if you want to get ready for investors, do outreach to them and go further here. As well as supporting if you're running a virtual accelerator or an incubation program, or you have your own community. Yeah, that was a quick introduction to DueDash. If you have more questions, you just come to duedash.com or under community.duedash.com. Reach out to me on the community or via michael@duedash.com. And now I would like to introduce our speaker for today, the amazing Frank here. Happy to have you here. So who is Frank? And Frank is an ecosystem developer for Twilio and startups. He's taking care of like the EMEA region for Twilio. Frank works very closely with startups to help them from pre-seed up to Series A, making how can you build actually your business in this time. And he is showing you through using the tools that Twilio SendGrid has, how can you optimize your customer engagement, communication, and marketing. So this session will be all about harnessing the power of community. How can you scale and defend your value proposition, and use community-based marketing, as this will be the future of marketing. Gain traction, validate your product, and get that product market fit anywhere. And also when it comes to Twilio, I think he will be happy to share more details on this. So I will give it to you, Frank, because you are, I think, the best spokesperson for your own company. So yeah, with that, happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Naveen, it was because I was on mute, but it is a pleasure to meet all of you, and thank you for your time. As Mikhail said, I'm an ecosystem developer for Twilio startups in EMEA. And today I'm going to be really talking about community development's importance to startup defensibility. As Mikhail said, really highlighting how, the future of marketing is very much vested in your capacity to build communities, and not just communities, but active communities that are engaged. And I think this is irrespective of whether you're building a B2B business or a B2C business. So I think it's something that is of value to any type of founder. And I think if you're able to, or you have the capacity to convert your customers into people who can evangelize about your product, this has a net positive impact on your marketing strategy as well as your go-to-market strategy and customer acquisition. If you do have any questions today, let's save them to the end. I'm going to try and get through this presentation as quickly as possible, and then we can review and discuss if there's anything you'd like to go over at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And just for bandwidth, I'm just going to turn off my video for now, and then I'll reactivate it at the end whilst I go through the presentation. Can everyone see the presentation now? Is it clear for everyone?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mikhail. So before we get started into the session, we're going to look at the anatomy of a community. We're going to look at a few case studies. We're then going to explore how community development supports defensibility for a startup, how you can go about measuring your community metrics, and then really how you can equip your startup with tools and think about how Twilio can help with your customer acquisition strategy, go-to-market strategy, and just really get you thinking about how to embed communications and customer engagement into your product before you begin to scale. So if anyone doesn't know about Twilio, a quick overview: we're a cloud communications platform that enables companies to build, scale, and operate on any communications experience utilizing APIs. What you can see in this screen is just really a high-level overview of the varying aspects and components that a founder needs to be thinking about as they're going to build and scale their business. And now the areas in red are the areas where Twilio can really add value and support and really help you to think about your go-to-market strategy, customer engagement, and communications, especially from a multi-channel perspective. And lastly, this is just a high-level overview of Twilio. I think many of you may come to know Twilio, if you've come to hear about Twilio, through our channel APIs such as SMS, email, after the acquisition of SendGrid, WhatsApp, and chat. But we have a variety of different tools and APIs which are really compelling, and depending on your business and the use case, can really help you as you're looking to reach your customers better, but also thinking about optimizing engagement. So today we're looking at really the anatomy of a community. And so when you think about your startup's community, we know that it's built on a special relationship that revolves around involvement, interaction, and incentive. Your community development not only demonstrates your startup's values, which is the theoretical component of your values that underpin your startup, but it actually turns your values and manifests them in a practical manner. And I think really compelling communities and community-based marketing strategies, you really see how certain businesses have been able to take this abstraction and make it something that is material and adds value to their customers across all stages of their growth. When we look at community in the front, it really is part of like the CNS or the spine of your business. And as I think a lot of people don't tend to view community building as something of value or something that's a driver for business success, but in an extremely crowded marketplace, it's becoming increasingly compelling that you have a very active community that's highly engaged. You really have to make your community the face of your company, and it has to be held together by good practice. The amazing things about communities is not only the fact that they give you access to feedback, because your customers are in the front line of product use, it gives you opportunities to have customers who evangelize your product. And I think community building has to be thought about for the right reasons, because with the wrong intentions, it can easily be visible and understood to be, a bit of not a scam, but just not genuine or authentic. So I think it really can be the spine and the backbone of your business, depending on how you're going to go to market and really what the output is of what you're trying to build. So At a high level overview, you have different segments or components within the anatomy of the community. You've got people who are influencers who are going to go out and evangelize your product. You have people who love your product or service and are merely going to be followers. And then you've got engaged and active members. And this was just a way that I think it helps for you to segment really what the anatomy of the community is. I think influencers are highly knowledgeable and shape the community, the discussion, the interaction. Your active members are really people who are super valuable to you, especially if you're looking to define or you're looking for product market fit. Your active members are usually going to be the people who engage with you, are willing to do A/B testing, do focus groups, and really solve some of the problems or highlight the problems with your product or service. And then your followers are just people who happen to be a bit more passive. They enjoy your product and service, but they're seeking help and more likely to observe as you're building or scaling your product. When we look at the 3 T's of community building, fundamentally, as you're building your community, you need to think about, thrilling your community members or your customers, teaching them, and then touch or talk engagement. And although we are in a virtual world for the best part of it, I'm going to expand on the touch and talk piece a bit later on. But in terms of thrilling community members, one of the things you have to be when you're building a community is really passionate about the core values and how you're going to manifest these core values. And you have to be able to inspire, engage, and fundamentally bring your community to life. When we look at teaching as a member, as a component, of community building, it's really about informing your customers and advising them as to the best use cases and how they can really leverage your product or service. And fundamentally, when we look at touch or talk, it's really about ensuring that you're engaging. Really what this is how do you engage with your customers or your community? And does your platform or your community provide people with the space to talk, to engage, to trial the product? A good example of community building for a business that's done it in real life would be Apple. So Apple has really been good at community building because when you go to any Apple store in the world, when you look at whether it's the Genius Bar or people who are working within the store, they've created a space where people can engage with the products, interact, and get a better understanding of how to develop a relationship with the product. You see this also at a variety of different businesses, be it B2B or B2C businesses. But really what you're trying to do is inform your customers, educate them, make them excited about the product or service, and then engage them in a variety of different ways. So we're going to look at a case study of a company that's done a really good example of community building, and Twitch TV is actually a really compelling use case. So Twitch began as a live casting site and then focused on gaming content. And what's happened is in 3 years, the community has grown from 1 million to 60 million unique visitors per month as a KPI and a metric. And I think what's really compelling about this is that it has now become the premier gaming community website globally. When we look at Twitch's engagement tiers, you have viewers who are passive and are unlikely to participate. You have fans who are members who participate in chats and are a bit more active, and they notify the team and the community about bugs or issues. You have broadcasters who are playing the games, hosting the chats, and engaging with the fans. And lastly, game developers who are the game creators, and they market games and also use Twitch as an opportunity to reach and extend their influence in the market as they go to market. So what Twitch focused on in terms of priorities as they were building out their community is really listening. Twitch listened to their fans' ideas and their suggestions through town halls. They then empowered their community and their customers by giving them the tools to go and act on the ideas that they've drawn down and distilled. And then they really made sure that the community that they're building espouses the values of transparency. So really owning up to mistakes if there have been challenges or issues and doing their best to resolve these in a timely manner. When we look at these 3 components, be it listening, empowering their customers by giving them the tools, and transparency, all of these things really come down to customer obsession. And so customer obsession is highly interdependent with community building, and they shouldn't be thought of as being mutually exclusive, but rather they overlap and interact with each other in a really compelling manner. When we look at community building as a factor of Twitch's growth, Twitch placed community building at the forefront, and they took really key steps to ensure their business model was aligned with community development. At the beginning of this talk, one of the things I really wanted to highlight is how founders need to think about embedding community building into their product. In the same way, design has become intentional into, a SaaS product's ability to scale and achieve viral growth. Community building has to have the same type of precedent as well into a product. And so Twitch did this really well. Their community building efforts enabled their product to be highly accessible, to build a genuine rapport with their members of the team. It created systematic discussion and enabled them to plan and be a lot more informed about their product roadmap and product development. When we look at the tools implemented by Twitch for community engagement, Twitch used in-person initiatives to connect the Twitch brand to the community. And I think what was really great about this is that these initiatives did not stop at the booths or the town halls, they continued online. And it comes back to that point I highlighted earlier about community building. It's not just doing, for example, a webinar. It's not just, for example, having a Zoom call or doing a town hall. You always have to be thinking, what are the multitude of channels or approaches I can take to engage with my customers in a variety of different ways to show them that the relationship that's being built is genuine and it's grounded in empathy. So, they had Twitch circles, Twitch town halls, and Twitch parties. And as we look at whether, Twitch's community master plan, if it did work, it was seen as a risky venture when it was purchased by Amazon in 2014. And really the big question that everyone was thinking about was how to make watching games entertaining. And communities until that point were often separated and far-flung due to a lack of expansiveness in gaming communities and just understanding how to reach people in really across a global audience. When we look at the execution, I think the active and real-time engagement, which is the interaction between the community development and what happened beyond organizing meetings, that really took off. And that really began to scale because of the intention behind the team at Twitch. And I think what's compelling is beyond gaming, Twitch have expanded into ensuring that people with similar interests can collectively come together in one space. When you think about community building, you really have to understand that you have to give your members a reason to stick around. And your community is a symbiotic relationship between the business and your customers. And so it's really driven by a simple input-output exercise. The input you put in and the energy you put into building your community and ensuring that it's a fundamental part of your product's design, there's a more higher potentiality of your community being more engaged and growing with you as you scale your business. And so, for example, you can see that Twitch viewers watch streams for longer and are more active than a variety of different platforms who have embedded or adopted a similar approach. What I really love about what Marcus DJ Wheat Graham highlighted, and he's the director of creator development at Twitch, is he highlights, if you're trying to tap into an existing community, the lesson here is that your community builder must be a bridge into that world. And they must care not because they're getting a paycheck, but because they're deeply invested in serving the community at large. I think this is a really, really powerful statement. Why is it a powerful statement? It's powerful because usually the net return on community building cannot be immediately seen. And so this is why a lot of businesses and founders start community building and then they stop it because, the ROI is not immediately visible. And there's a lag, which can usually take maybe a year, 2 years, if not longer. But the thing is, when you're building a community in the same way, when you're serving your early customers, you have to be extremely passionate and driven to solve the problem. The same lens that we provide on being customer obsessed and really focusing on your customer is the same approach if not more, for how you should approach community building and community engagement as a result of community building. I think what's super compelling about community building and community-based marketing is that it provides defensibility. You know, technology moats have reduced substantially. You know, you've got a lot of no-code tools. There's just so much opportunity than there's ever been historically to build a business today. And so when you think about your customer, be it whether your proposition is a B2B proposition or a B2C proposition, the market is incredibly noisy with the amount of founders who are building business. And so when you're thinking about how you're vying for a customer's time in terms of attention, building an engaged community is actually one of the key ways you can build a raft or a moat to defend the product or service that you're bringing to market. Even if another competitor was able to enter and they had more money, if you have a really strong community that values what you're building or the service that you're providing, it can give you enough room and time to keep scaling, acquire the investment that's necessary based on the KPIs that you have, and fend off any potential competition. So as we dive in a bit more into community building, we can see that there are different types of effects that take place as a result of having a community. Your community gives you defensibility in a variety of different ways. Some communities work together, others are exclusive, and you don't have to attain them all. I think it's just really fundamental you understand how your business model works, how you're engaging with your community, and what's the desired effect or outcome that you're looking for. From steps 1 to 5, we have a variety of different community effects. You've got the direct effect between, and examples of this are seen with LinkedIn and WhatsApp. You've got a two-sided effect that you usually see in marketplaces where, you know, we can add Etsy, potentially Amazon to that list. You have the data-bound effect where we talk about, you know, the lock-ins that accrue as a result of data and data aggregation for communities. You have the network effect where we can see this with BitTorrent, Skype, and the interpersonal effect between Slack, Twitch, and a variety of different other platforms. Expanding on the community effect and different types of communities. With the direct effect, I think communities there are brought together with the need to directly communicate or seek information. When we look at the two-sided effect, this is when 2 or more individuals interact through an intermediary. So you can see that if you're building a platform, this is how probably you need to be thinking about community-based marketing. When we look at the data-bound effect, it's communities that are coalescing around obtaining data or the exchange of data needed for work, leisure, etc. So thinking more about potentially APIs as a business or B2B businesses, this could be a compelling approach. You then have the network effect, which is communities that organically and exponentially scale. The more people that leverage the service, i.e. Facebook. And then the interpersonal effect, when familiar individuals intermingle directly for the purpose of work or entertainment. So that's usually where the network effect has an overlap. And so depending on the type of business you're building and what your go-to-market strategy is, you really need to think about how you would approach community-based marketing, and then what would be the community effect that you're looking for as you engage with your customers, and look to shape your community.
Amazon.
As I mentioned earlier, your brand advocates are the people who are going to fight for you. They are your early customers. And as we've seen and we know, your early customers are also going to be the people who help you to achieve product market fit. Early adopters give your business a baseline of like how valuable your product is, essentially. Good customer care given to your community means they're likely to recommend and evangelize your service. Rewards for your community help them to thrive, and it allows you to keep your ear on the ground for improvements and ways to optimize your community. And the shared purpose through community allows people to work together and co-adapt and congregate around a common purpose and a common cause that they wouldn't otherwise be able to or have access to. So when we speak about defensibility for startups, it can be an oxymoron, but I think what you need to think about is that your community should be a place where your customers or people who are just curious should be able to engage, and members are ready to share ideas. Your startup might have the capital, but I think resources and a brand presence to expound the ideas generated by your community are key. And defensibility created through communities when starting out can present equal or opposing effects. So certain fundamentals such as timing, planning, or what competitors are doing in terms of a better version of idea can slow down your execution at times of your community-based marketing ideas. And you might be listening to the wrong influencers or adopting the wrong approach, or ignoring the people who may be your most active users, which is also another fundamental problem. So when you're thinking about community building, it can at times be a bit confusing, but that's why I said at the beginning, you really need to think about, what is the intent and the purpose behind why you are adopting community-based marketing for your product. So how do you do community development right? This is just a few fundamentals that will give you the right kind of understanding about defensibility. So one, build relationships. Community members should have agency and understand their needs and get to know them. As you get to know them, this should unearth more issues about the product or service that you're bringing to market. Establish a baseline. Communities like stability and consistency. Offer actions and decisions that are consistent, fair, and predictable. Hire the right people. Your team will help you determine the needs of your community, and they're going to be your guiding star as well as your North Star when we're looking at customer acquisition and community-based advocacy. And the results won't come overnight, which is a point I've highlighted previously. It takes time to curate, engage, and collaborate with your community, and rushing into it or doing it half-heartedly can have a net negative result on your ability to acquire customers as you scale. So Guy Kawasaki is, he's a renowned marketing specialist, an author, venture. He's really the person who really drove what it means to evangelize products and services. He did this back in the day for Apple. And he highlights a good response to the question of attaining defensibility requires a combination of clairvoyance, street wisdom, humility, honesty, and arrogance. There are no magic bullets that provide defensibility. I lifted up this quote in particular because all of these components reflect community building and community-based marketing, in the sense that it is the amalgamation of a variety of different efforts that lead to community-based marketing. However, no single strand or component of it in of itself will provide defensibility. And so your ability to keep on optimizing, engaging your customers, engaging with your community, that is highly dependent on your efforts. And actually it creates a positive net effect depending on, I guess, the effort and intention behind your community-based efforts. As we come to looking at measuring your community metrics, it's always key to measure it, because if you can't measure it, then you can't actually move the needle. So you have to make it measurable, quantifiable, ensure the data is easily available, timely, in terms of really evaluating your community, ensuring that it's repeatable and conclusive to scale your community in the same manner to the manner you'll take with customer acquisition. Insightful, your community should provide in fact, greater evidence and insights into, your product or the service that you're providing. And it should be controllable in terms of like the different levers you can control to manage your community. When you think about developing your custom metric, these are 5 characteristics you need to consider when choosing a metric for your community. Try and develop a flowchart representing the process. Identify the immediate and final results. Aim to quantify all your community-based marketing efforts and community building. Apply the necessary criteria to the measures and determine how many are met, and then create a report method for the quantitative data. And I think it's always great if you can actually cross-reference the impact of your community building against customer acquisition and vice versa to see the relationship between customer acquisition, community building, and again, how this will inform your go-to-market strategy going forward. And then these are just a few metrics you can examine if you're unsure or undecided about community-based marketing and the impact it can have for your business. So behind every metric, there's a person, and really take the time to understand and address their needs, which is fundamental to community-based marketing and its capacity for it to be an element of defensibility for your startup. So think about your content, if it meets their needs. What is the retention rate for your customers and your community? What percentage of your content is user-generated or organic? And how does your community self-moderate? Or is it something that has to be actively managed and handheld? When we look at growth, community engagement needs to show results, and you need to be able to measure fundamentally the effectiveness of your strategies. So what is the growth rate in a specific time period? How many members leave and what tier are they, if you can tier these customers or segment them? And what is the transition from a new membership to active participant within your community? When we look at activity, we're really looking at your community, and as we've been referencing throughout this presentation, it takes time to curate, and you need to really assess your community at different points in time to guide how you're going to structure it and scale it. So think about, in terms of KPIs, which content drives engagement, what content is lacking in your community that members are yearning for, and what content is, the most popular, or rather the right way to engage with your customers. So is it vlogs? Is it AMAs? Is it workshops? Is it one-to-ones? Is it focus groups? These are some of the things you need to be thinking about. And so lastly, we're coming up to the element, which is equipping your startup with the tools and really thinking about Twilio in some component. So the importance of community engagement is not to alienate groups, but to get everybody involved in a variety of different ways. The key thing is, how are you going to meet your customers halfway? 95% of people in virtual settings, as well as in face-to-face community events, are scared to speak up. And so when we look at, the Twilio Toolkit, this was just something that I put together to get you to think about the varying ways that our tools and APIs can help you in your customer acquisition strategy, thinking about customer engagement and community building. As I highlighted at the beginning of the workshop, Twilio's got a variety of different tools and APIs that can support you as you're looking to communicate with your customers, engage them, and build out your community. And I think what's really amazing about Twilio's tools is not just the fact that, you have the capacity to have a multi-channel approach and communicate with your customers in a variety of different ways, but it drives customer engagement. Your ability to drive customer engagement will inform your capacity to build a successful community. And if you're really a startup between that, pre-seed to Series A phase, community building, as well as customer engagement, are two components you really need to think about and really get comfortable with embedding this into your product as you scale. So the Twilio Toolkit really allows you to open up your community to users who might not or cannot participate in face-to-face community events. So really thinking about how to leverage these APIs in a virtual world, how you engage with your customers, for example, over email, SMS, WhatsApp, chat, etc. So these are just a variety of different ways you could utilize our APIs, and I'm happy to explore this more with you at the end of the session if there's any questions. Lastly, to summarize, you need to understand what makes your startup community and the steps you need to take to nurture it. Communities can have tangible benefits and can be the CNS, as I mentioned, or the backbone of a business. your community efforts can be sustainable if you look at the right metrics and understand what is the ethos or the purpose of building a community or adopting community-based marketing. And Twilio has the solutions to curate your community, enabling you to keep them informed, secure, and connected, as well as adopting a multi-channel approach to customer engagement. And these are some resources. I'll be happy to share this with Mikhail at the end of the event to share with you, where you can really read up about different components of community building, community-based marketing, and how this can really add value to your business as you're looking to acquire new customers and build out your marketing strategy. Thank you very much for your time today. And if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe let's just end the screen sharing. Let's go to the screen again. Yeah. First, thank you, Frank, for a very insightful presentation. Very interesting. And I think there was a couple of questions that were already in chat. Maybe let's just go through these. I think there was one by Sarah Fox in the beginning. Yeah, will you talk about IP implications of putting business ideas on a public platform? So, of course, like we already had this chat, but is there anything
that was actually for you?
For
when
me.
You were talking about DueDash,
Oh, okay, interesting. Because like I'm not talking much about DueDash today. We are all about community marketing and Frank today. But you can send me a message on DueDash, and we can kind of take this further on where.
Okay, and I just want to say thank you, Frank, because that was awesome. I don't have a question at this time for you, but there was so much information packed into that presentation that was really useful for me as I'm just building, just recently launched, and I understand the need to have a community, but I have an investor who doesn't actually see the value, and I've been trying to communicate that, but a lot of the things that you said today will help me. So thank you.
I think that
no worries, Sarah.
A question for you also, right, Frank? The investor part, when she kind of said, like, how do I convince my investor to the value of a community? How would you go about it when you would have to convince your investor about your community?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question. I think from an investor's perspective, they're going to be looking at the KPIs. And so when we're looking at the last few slides, it really comes down to, we need to understand what KPIs underpin your community. Because, for example, if you tell your investor, I've got an active community, I'm thinking, okay, what's the engagement rate? What's the net new amount of customers or members who are joining the community? How long do they stay? Like, you need to be able to underpin your community with all of these KPIs and metrics, because until you can show that to an investor, there is no value in your community. It has no value, in as much as saying, I've got 500 customers, but I don't know anything about these customers. So I think you can really use these KPIs to unearth if there is value in the community that you're building. And I think it will also help you understand, for example, the types of people in your community, whether they're engaged, whether they're not engaged, and really the tweaks and changes you need to make. And just as an add-on to that point, your community is very much, again, as I said, interdependent with customer acquisition. If you're able to acquire customers, bring them into a community, you're basically almost nurturing your customers, keeping them informed. You're still marketing to them. And so if you're able to, have these KPIs for your customer acquisition, and then you also have KPIs for, engagement around your community, that is something that's very compelling. And a lot of successful startups have very strong communities, which would also be, as a KPI, it would come down to probably traction. So this is something you can definitely speak to an investor about. They're just going to be looking for a lot more granularity in terms of the data and the KPIs that support what your community is doing, essentially.
Thank you.
No worries.
I think there were two questions, kind of like basics on Twilio. I think one person asked, is Twilio similar to a CRM? And also take another question. Also, we talk about Twilio. Does Twilio integrate into any of the shelf community spaces, such as Mighty Networks, Facebook groups?
So for the first question, Mikhail, was it about Twilio being a CRM?
Somebody said, like, is it similar to a CRM? like asked. I think that was a bit in the beginning. Yes, Twilio CM, like
Yes.
Salesforce, I think somebody asked, yeah.
By I think it's Jean or Jean. So Twilio is not a CRM like Salesforce, but we can integrate with Salesforce. A. B. Twilio is right now, it's basically a communication platform as a service company. That's what we are. But we are beginning to move into customer engagement. And really what we want to become is really the de facto platform for any startup or enterprise customer or developer to be able to get all of the insights required on who their customer is. Basically, for you to understand them end to end and have the data and the insights to add the value or support them in whichever way your business is looking to do. So although we are not a CRM, depending on how you utilize Twilio, you could potentially get those benefits. And depending on, for example, the integrations that you would use with the likes of Salesforce or Zapier, then you could leverage Twilio, for example, like, for example, you could link an SMS flow to a CRM or with Zapier into Airtable. And so there's a variety of different ways you could utilize Twilio if you're looking for like a CRM component. But really, we're focusing around communications and customer engagement. That's the sweet spot where we operate.
There was also a question when it comes on watch parties. So basically here, I think Jen said, like, we are in the OTT business world and we already have a community. As a platform, it's hard to engage outside of the films. Do you think the idea of watch parties is a good idea?
OTT business world as a platform, it's hard to
like 616, yeah.
616, okay.
Yeah, we're in the OTT business world.
And we already have a community. I think, so just to answer your question, I'm just gonna like answer it in tiers. So I think it's great that you have a community and it's hard to engage outside of films. I think one of the things you need to do is, is it outside of films in terms of there's nothing else you can engage on? And then if that is the case, then it really comes back to really segmenting and really don't be afraid to ask your community, what more could you do? You know, what more value could your community provide? Because if your community is engaged, they will tell you. They will tell you what they're looking for. They'll tell you what more you can do. I think the ideas of watch parties is good. I think film recommendations is good, depending on genres, themes, just so many different ways you could segment and splice you know, how you engage with your community there, especially around media and content recommendations. So I think maybe a two-tier approach would be actually ask your customers and your community, what are they looking for? What more value can you provide? Survey them, do focus groups, one-to-ones, and also think about, for example, whatever you're already doing in your community, is there a way you could further segment these behaviors or this approach to enable basically different types of micro communities to pop up and emerge within your community building efforts?
Actually, makes me also think when we talk about community building, a typical challenge I've seen also of community builders is often a question like, how much do I monetize my community? How much is it kind of like keep it free and work on it? So how do a community builder finds the right pace to kind of monetize the community?
In my personal opinion, I think if you are going to adopt a community-based marketing approach, or you're looking to build a really thriving community, I don't think you should be focusing on monetizing it in the beginning. I don't think there should be any question of monetizing it at all, purely because it comes across as inauthentic and disgenuine. Not because that's your case, but usually intention and output tend to be two different things. So your intention may not be to create this effect, but that's what the output is. So that's something to always be mindful of. I also think as well, when you're looking at communities, there are a variety of different people who could be in your community. It could be customers who want more and they fall into that bucket. It could also be people who are trying to see what kind of business you are, and they're on the fence and they're in your community observing, a bit more passive. The reason why you don't want to charge or monetize is because your community should really be a safe space. It should be a space whereby I'm not charging you, I'm not trying to sell the product to you, but rather it's a place and an opportunity for you to engage with the product, engage with the founding team, engage with people who work in the business to better understand the product, how to leverage it. And then you can actually go away and make your own informed decisions. But when you're looking to monetize a community, it can usually fall flat. And if you're looking to do that, then fundamentally there's no essence to even building a community in the first place. You might as well adopt a hard sales approach, because that's naturally what it would become. So I think with community building, I can understand why people do get frustrated, because there is a substantial lag time, but it probably, if done well, it can create the most strongest moat out there, because once a customer has lock-in to your product, because they actually enjoy what you're building, they enjoy your values, and they've connected with it on a much deeper level, even if there was a substitute to the service or the solution you've provided, the lock-in effects would mean that the switching costs are way too high for your customer to switch to a competitor or substitute product, sometimes even irrespective of price.
There's another question on competitors from Naveen. Basically asked, so how many competitors have you recognized as yet, and how will you tackle them being a strong team member of Twilio community?
Naveen, I don't think that question is 100% clear. Are you trying to say how many competitors has Twilio recognized, and how do we tackle them being a strong member of the Twilio community? Well, fundamentally, we're constantly listening to our customers, we're constantly listening to developers, and we make space for them as much as possible. Fundamental to Twilio's success was the capacity to be, business to developer. That's what we were, and that has not changed. We are still business to developer, actively supporting developers, not just in really strong markets, but in underserved markets as well. We don't really focus too much on competition. What we are trying to do will vary incredibly much so in comparison to our competitors. They probably have their approach to community building, how they engage with their customers, and all of these things. So there's going to be a natural variance, and we've never really looked to our competitors to see what they're doing. Our focus has always been two things: to be, obsessive about customers, listening to them, and really taking the feedback from our community of developers, from our customers, to inform the products that we build and our roadmap going forward. With regards to, I think, thinking about how to have a strong team to develop community building, it comes down to your approach. I think as long as you're not too worried about I don't think you should ever be worried about competitors. I think you just have to double down on who your customers are, ensure that the solution, service, product you're providing them actually meets their needs, and make space for them to actually hear if they've got feedback or any problems. I think if you do these three things really, really well, you wouldn't have to worry about how your competitors approach community-based marketing, community building, or customer acquisition.
Going a bit on kind of growing a community stuff. Theo kind of had a question. Do you have an idea how large active a community should be to start growing under its own steam? Is there a key size inflection point? So when can it kind of grow organically in a sense?
I think it's not so much about the size, but the types of participants that make up the community. If, for example, you have 50 people in a community and they're all passive, 50 is a good size, but that inflection point means it may not actually kick off and start growing because everybody in that community is passive. Whereas you could have maybe 5 to 10 people in the community, and 3 of those people are highly engaged, very active, brand ambassadors, and they would naturally do all the work for you with a community of just about 10. So it's not so much the size of the inflection point, but remember when I did that, I segmented the 3 types, and at the top you had people who are pretty much like the evangelists and the advocates for your community. Those are the types of people you want, because irrespective of the size of your community, they're the people who are going to naturally cause it to grow as a net positive, as well as the efforts that you put into. But when we look at, for example, Nike, Adidas, Twilio, the Salesforces of this world, and like a lot of great companies, be it B2B or B2C, the key thing they've all done well is their community is comprised of individuals and groups who are very, very passionate, inspired about the product, and they do the legwork. So what you really don't want is, you don't want to have, not to say it's a bad thing, but if you've got a very large group of passive people in your community, then it's not bad. It just means that it's just going to take a lot more hand-holding until you hit that inflection point where your community will actually begin to take off on its own, and people will self-manage and self-organize individually.
I guess going from where's a question from Samir. What is, in your opinion, are the main feature community that directly increases the investability of a startup? Keeping in mind the startup community can be small scale. Directly tying to the title of the session.
I think when like looking at really great startups and businesses that we work with, even within the team, I think really great startups, when we come to thinking about community building that directly increase the investability of a startup, I think it's the KPIs that underpin your community building efforts is fundamental. So getting really tight on this. I also think one of the main components is informing and educating your community. I think a lot of community building efforts revolve around awareness, which is great. And sometimes like touch and feel engagement in some capacity. But if you're not able to educate and inform your community, as well as, you know, your customers as a whole, then no one really gets empowered to go off and basically evangelize your product. So I think I would say the key thing is being able, like for community building, being able to inform and educate your customer or community. And then in terms of KPIs, I think really getting tight on the KPIs. So when we look at, for example, just quick example of when we look at, for example, the likes of Clubhouse and other startups that have gone absolutely viral, you know, it's really because when you look at how they approached community-based marketing, especially for B2C businesses more so than B2B, their ability to acquire customers is fundamentally tied in to the product, and their community is also tied in to their customer acquisition strategy. And so if you're able to really have strong KPIs, as I mentioned to Sarah earlier about how an investor doesn't think it's important and community is a bit wishy-washy, if you have strong KPIs that underpin the activities of your community, then it becomes compelling. I think those are the components I think that would increase the investability of a startup. Like if you told me you've got 50,000 people in your community actively engaged, and you know, you could say that they're communicating around, for example, there's 1,000 communications happening like on a weekly basis, that's quite compelling. That makes me then perk up and think, okay, if you were to tweak a certain few things, could that drive your customer acquisition strategy? Could they go and evangelize your product further? So I think these are the things that would drive, in my opinion, the investability of a startup. But also bear in mind, there's no right or wrong formula. It's a multitude of formulas required in order for your community building or community-based marketing to be successful.
I'm going to take one last question, which I think is a fit. Madi kind of was asking about, let's say, the history of Twilio. So what was the first ideas of Twilio? So how did it kind of idea to start making Twilio? We can tell about the history of a company when here.
That's a good question. Madi, I would highly recommend checking out some of the content that our founder, Jeff Lawson, has put out there about starting Twilio, which is pretty much everywhere on the internet. But one of the things I remember when Jeff was talking about Twilio was really how, and he always highlights this, is how he was listening to customers. It was actually customers who provided the insight, and that's when Jeff got the hunch to go out and actually test and see, you know, it would be cool to basically embed communications within a website and within an application. And that's pretty much like the early days when we look at what Jeff did and how he came about thinking about Twilio. I think from listening to Jeff's journey and experience, Twilio is the direct product of listening to customers and being absolutely obsessed about customers. All of the insights for the products we've ever built, all of the products we're still building, everything we do has revolved around developers who we serve and our customers at large. And that's never going to change. I think that's really what underpinned Jeff's vision and still underpins his vision for building Twilio. And I think when you look at his story and you see how the company has scaled, working in the developer evangelism team, one of the things I can see, especially within marketing, is how active our community is, how active the developer community is, and how, you know, despite Twilio growing and scaling to its size, we still approach community building, we still approach developer evangelism as if it's still day one. So I think, you know, looking at Jeff's story, it's always been and will continue to always be around customer obsession and, you know, really listening to your customers, because that's where the insights and the value will come as to the type of product you build and bring to market.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much, Frank. You know, talking about Twilio, talking about building a community, you know, like the future. When it comes to community marketing, you hear more and more news and about doing these things. And actually, even the title of being like a community builder, community marketer, or something like this is quite fresh, right? Taking care of these, like a few 5-10 years ago, fairly new. And now you hear more and more about it. And I'm not sure where I read this, but I think it was either venture capitalist or founder. Somebody said like in 5 years on the boards of most startups, you will find kind of like on the C-level, somebody who is taking care of community, like a head of community or whatever. So definitely goes into that direction. How can we actually leverage this? How can we use also great tools like Twilio to really work with a customer, understand them, you know, dig deep and create the value. Thank you very much for all of you listening. I hope that you also check out Twilio. I sent that link, I think, multiple times here in the chat, so you can also check it out, get the free credits from Twilio, learn about their products. If you have more questions, chat me up on DueDash or just via my email, and happy to talk anything more. And if there's further question also to Frank, you can connect with him and yeah, and start using the great tools that Twilio has. Otherwise, thanks Al for coming, and hope to see you at our next event, which will be on the 30th of March, actually. We'll have a great investor coming in. So with that, I would say good evening to all of you and talk to you soon. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Thank you very much, everyone.